Because humanity has brought climate change, afflictions, and war to Earth, the Earth has come uninhabitable. The ruling elite escapes as soon as they can and settle on the Kepler-209 space colony. Over time, the colony acquires ultramodern technology and space trip, but they've come infertile due to the heavy radiation there. 2 generations laterally, the Ulysses project is started to find out whether it's possible to return to Earth. Still, the first charge is lost shortly after Worf. Eventually, laterally, they shoot an alternate boat called Ulysses 2 with astronauts Louise, Tucker, and Holden. Unfortunately, entering the atmosphere turns out to be rougher than anticipated, and the space capsule crash lands on a tidal tenement near a rainfall lamp that broadcasts telemetry data back to Kepler. After swimming to the reinforcement with all her strength in order to survive, Louise looks for her mates. Holden is also on the sand, but unfortunately he's formerly dead, and Tucker is inside the space capsule with an injured leg. Louise has no choice but to go exploring alone, starting by testing the water with a biometer and chancing some signs of life. After chancing some kind of chelicerata, Louise comes across a doormat such-like beast, and when she tries to take a sample for testing, the critter suddenly stings her wrist. Luckily, Louise has a medical tackle and incontinently squirts some medical spray on the crack before putting the sample in her red bag. At that moment, Tucker tells her that a storm is coming, and Louise loses her visibility when a thick fog surrounds her. So Tucker climbs out of the capsule and shoots up a flare. Following the light, Louise sluggishly begins making her way back to the shuttle, ignorant that a mysterious man also saw the flare. He gets to the shuttle first and attacks Tucker, who defends himself with the flare gun and scares him down. By the time Louise eventually crosses the fog, she finds out that Tucker and the shuttle have been taken nearly differently. She can hear Tucker yelling for help, so she uses the compass on her gun and notices a group of people dragging her shuttle. Suddenly, another group attacks her from before and Louise loses knowledge. Eventually, laterally, Louise and Tucker wake up in a large hole of water, and they're shocked to find there are survivors closing the lid. Seeing Tucker's injuries getting worse, Louise climbs up and through a hole she asks for medical inventories, but it's too slippery and she falls. At that moment, a rope is thrown down by a mysterious figure, and Louise eventually climbs out to find a whole community of rich humans known as the Guk. Louise not believe she's seeing children again. Unfortunately, she does not understand their language, and she gets dragged down as the Guk use gestures to ask her to help the man whose face was injured by Tucker's flare. Louise tries to explain she needs her inventories, and eventually Narvik shows up. She knows how to speak English and takes Louise to her shuttle. Chancing the medical tools is easy, but Louise also notices that someone has removed all technology from the boat. When she hesitates to move, she's pushed to the ground and asked to bear. Subsequently, Louise heals the injured man with the spray, using the chance to hide some medical inventories in her clothes. She also notices someone has her red bag, knowing the biometer is outside. When she's thrown back in the hole, she gives Tucker drug while telling him about all the kitties and babies she saw. Since their boat is broken, she believes that they must find the biometer and use it to call for help. However, Tucker knows his injuries are bad and he won't make it, so he takes a result that he stores in his army label choker and ends effects for himself. Feeling lonely now, Louise begins allowing about her knowledge. Her father Blake had also been an astronaut and he was lost with the first charge. When she was a child, Blake gave her a matchbox with 3 notorious astronauts on the front and showed her he'd one of his own so they could match. He also told her to light one at a certain time and he'd do the same, promising that, before the last bone was gone, they would be together again. The expression for the numerous, which Louise repeats all the time, had been tutored to her by her pater, so she'd learned to watch about the lesser good. The flashback fades and it's revealed that Louise only has 1 match left. At that moment, the runs eventually come by and start to fill the hole, so Louise begins climbing up again. Grabbing onto the lid, she asks for help, and a Joe accepts to take her out and tie her to one of the community's boats. Louise behaves to gain their trust while watching Annette recoup Tucker's body. As the boat takes off in the middle of the night, Louise watches Tucker's body being transferred down on a raft, and this inspires another flashback. Louise's father told her that the people had despoiled Earth's coffers and showed her a tree seedling, which would not grow on their space colony. Unfortunately, he left shortly after that, and Louise could no way see if the trial with the seedling was successful. The coming morning, the water begins to retire and Louise is thrown back in the hole. Suddenly, she's visited by a girl named Mila, who gives Louise her medical spray. By drawing on the wall, Louise eventually manages to communicate with the girl and learns many words, so she asks Mila to help her get the biometer. Eventually, laterally, Louise hears screaming outdoors and the lid is raised for a man to lower some girls and a baby into the hole. By observing through the hole, Louise sees that the agreement is being attacked and numerous people are being killed or abducted. Mila set up the red bag, but she's abducted as well. A man comes to the hole to check outside, but Louise and the children hide just in time. After the situation calms down, Narvik shows up to help them out, revealing that she is Mila's mama. After picking Mila's doll and Tucker's flare gun, Narvik runs off to save her son. Louise follows her because she wants to help her to save Mila, but Narvik is not sure. She can trust her indeed if she does partake some food with her. At that moment, they can hear Mila's riots from hence, so the two women climb on a big gemstone and learn that the internees are being taken down on a boat. Louise tells Narvik to shoot the flare gun into the sky as a distraction, but Narvik wants to attack blindly, so Louise has no choice but to knock her out. Also, Louise shoots the flare, and the men begin looking for the source of the light. While they're distracted, Louise jumps into the water with the fog acting as cover, and she snappily swims to the boat. After climbing up, she eventually finds her red bag in a net, but before she can leave, the men come aboard as well. Louise has no choice but to hide with Malia and the other captures. Ultimately, the boat stops at an enormous weight boat able of opposing the frequent cataracts and storms. The captures are taken to a guard named Paling, who decides where each of them goes. The boys are transferred to work while Mila and the other girls are taken down. Also, Fading finds Louise's gun in the red bag, and while looking for the proprietor, he realizes Louise is a original. Paling takes her through a corridor, and after searching her, he introduces her to the boat's leader Gibson, who turns out to be a survivor of the Ulysses I and remembers Louise from when she was a sprat. Louise tells him what happened to her boat and about the missing biometer, and in return Gibson tells her of his group's first hassle with the Guk when they arrived. Blake had been veritably good with the locals, but one day, they suddenly mutinied and destroyed the Ulysses I capsule along with its communication outfit, killing Blake in the process. Supposedly Blake had a plan to make a giant levee and use the ocean as electricity, so Gibson discusses with Louise the chances of bringing people from the colony back to Earth. Their discussion is intruded by Gibson's espoused son Neil, who gifts Louise an origami space shuttle. After giving Louise a stint of the place to show off the dam, Gibson takes Louise to a cabin where she can stay for now. She incontinently goes to bed and tries to deal with her grief while flashing back further wisdom. Assignments with her father. The coming morning after a shower, Louise finds blood between her legs and realizes that she is rich, so she could reproduce then. Subsequently, she's taken to a class full of the daughters of the Guk, including Mila, who doesn't look veritably happy. Gibson is educating them, and after they partake a song, he gives them the chance to ask Louise all kinds of questions about the space colony. Once the class is over, Louise goes for a walk and finds Neil, who gets private assignments rather of joining the others. He likes Louise because he loves astronauts, and after she helps him with his calculation schoolwork, he shows her a secret that keeps hiding behind a curtain. It's a small tree growing in a jar. Fading the trial, Louise asks Neil how he learned to do that, and he replies that there's a strange man living in a cabin next to the machine room. Louise wants Neil to take her there, but he isn't supposed to talk to the man at all and refuses. After taking a chart of the boat from a door, Louise snappily makes her way to the man's cabin, where she learns that her father is alive and has been locked down all this time. At that moment, Gibson shows up and begins justifying his falsehoods by explaining that Blake actually led the rebellion because he sided with the Guk after falling in love with a slush woman. Also, Louise is eventually allowed outside and reunites with her pater after 15 times. She's disappointed that her pater has betrayed the charge and given up on his son, but Blake explains that the Kepler residers should no way return to Earth, saying he has to stop the miscalculations. Hurt, Louise runs out of the room. Laterally, when the drift is high, Louise eventually gets to see the rainfall station where they can connect the biometer to communicate Kepler. She decides to tell Gibson that she's rich so she can be the substantiation they need, and Gibson promises to find the biometer. Also, Louise is invited to regale, and Neil's Mama Mooney tells Louise how Gibson set up her when she was giving birth and saved Neil from dying because he was born with his umbilical cord around his neck. That day they connected and Gibson espoused them as his family. Suddenly the power goes off and Fading informs Gibson that a meddler took out the guards to reach the power box. Gibson incontinently orders everyone to hide in their room before leaving with a gun. Louise takes a corridor to return to her cabin only to be caught by the meddler, who holds a cutter to Louise's throat and hurts her. It's also revealed that the meddler is Narvik, who's looking for her son. Louise takes Narvik to see Mila, but as soon as they enter the girl's room, they are suddenly girdled by guards. The women try to fight them while Mila cries out for her mama, but Paling shows up and kicks Narvik, ever knowing her name. Also, Fading orders his men to take Narvik down, but before she leaves, she whispers to Louise that they only take the girls and accidentally drops Mila's doll. Subsequently, power returns and Mooney treats Louise's crack as she mysteriously says she has his eyes. Louise looks at the bills on the wall and notices they're all prints of girls and gravidity. At that moment, Gibson comes to check on her and tells Louise that Narvik was one of the guards who turned against him during the rebellion. They bandy the situation and Louise eventually discovers that the girls are being held interned for Gibson's unborn parentage plans. Louise is shocked but pretends to be Gibson's supporter to avoid being arrested too. Suddenly, Fading comes in with the red bag, but when Gibson opens it, the biometer is outside. He sends Louise down and tells Fading to keep an eye on her before turning to his son, who shows him a doll he set up. Gibson also notices that the biometer is inside the doll. When she returns to her room, Louise hears a noise and finds Mila hiding in her closet, but Paling suddenly knocks on her door and forces his way in because he heard a sprat is missing. He looks around snappily and doesn't find Mila, but rather of leaving, he begins hitting on Louise, not minding about her turning him down. After some struggle, he pushes her against the wall, but before he can take advantage of her, he hears a noise coming from the closet. Paling moves to probe, but Louise rushes to him and distracts him with a kiss. Suddenly, Fading thresholds shaking and falls to the ground as he dies because Louise slipped into his mouth the Bane capsule from her army label choker. Subsequently, Louise takes Paling's armament and together with Mila, begins sneaking around the boat. When they encounter a guard, Mila distracts him and Louise knocks him out from before. Also, they reach the cell where they keep all the captures they use as work slaves. Narvik is there too and Louise gives her the guard's armament before she escapes with the others. While the captures deliver the girls, Louise goes to find Blake, who shows her commodity at the window. It turns out Gibson is going to the rainfall station with Neil and Mooney, which is weird because he no way leaves the boat. Also, Louise notices the doll Neil blessed Blake and realizes that Gibson has the biometer. She doesn't understand what evidence Gibson will shoot without her, and Blake reveals Neil isn't a slush. Louise hugs her pater as she accepts to stop Gibson, and Blake tells her he no way lit his last match. Meanwhile, the Guk escape from the boat while dodging gunfire from the guards. Louise joins them and shoots many men before the group runs out in the open, where further guards take the chance to kill many of them. Louise shoots any guard that comes too close and helps the group reach a boat before getting in the water to swim to the rainfall station. Gibson has taken Neil's blood and is about to shoot the communication, but Louise reveals herself and threatens him with her armament. Gibson responds by pointing his gun at Neil, revealing that he's Blake's son and thus her half-family. Mooney tries to defend her son, but Gibson simply shoots her in the head. Louise lowers her armament to save Neil from the same fate, and Gibson incontinently sends the data to Kepler using the biometer. Since he's distracted, Louise uses the chance to attack him into the water. Also, she strangles and drowns Gibson, nearly drowning herself in the process. Fortunately, Narvik rescues her and manages to revive her with CPR. Louise and Blake rejoin the Guk, and all of them set out in a tugboat. Neil is grieving his mama's death, so Louise goes to talk to him and gifts him her matchbox as a sign of stopgap. Moments laterally, a group of children are playing around back in the agreement and get spooked when they see numbers in the fog. Still, they perquisite up when they realize it's their abducted parents who are eventually free from Gibson's control. Thanks for watching and don't forget to subscribe.